Good morning. I'm calling to order our regularly scheduled meeting of the Committee of the Whole. My name is Elizabeth Glidden, and I'm the chair of this committee. And I'm joined today by Council Members Gordon, Cano, Council President Johnson, Council Member Andrew Johnson, Council Member Yang, Quincy, Warsame, and Fry. And I want to note that Councilmember Bender is out today on city business. And I think we may be joined by a few other council members shortly. We have a full agenda for today, and I want to thank everyone who has come here for the various items that are on our agenda. We have 5 public hearings, and then consideration by the council of reappointment of 5 charter department heads that have been recommended by the mayor. We also have a consent agenda item that is regarding a study of minimum wage increase. And then we have consideration of and discussion of the Park and Recreation Board resolution regarding a proposal for a special levy referendum. So with the permission of my colleagues, I'm going to ask to consider one item out of sequence, and that's just because it's a consent item and the research team is here, and I want to give them permission. If they want to stay, they are free to, but if they would like to leave, they are free to. And that is item number 6, which is the contract for a minimum wage increase study. And this item is to authorize a contract for a Minneapolis minimum wage increase study to be conducted by the competitively selected research team, consisting of representatives from the University of Minnesota, Howard University, Rutgers University, and the Economic Policy Institute. And I just want to note that we are joined today by a lead from that team, Dr. Sam Myers, who is with the University of Minnesota, and I know that many here are familiar with him and his work. And I want to thank Mr. David Frank also, who is here from the city, who led this process from the city perspective along with Mark Brenda. And this is an item that is just on consent, so I'm going to head and move approval of the item and ask if anybody has a question or a comment. And I don't have my speaker management up, so I'm just asking for help. Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I feel like we were here about 3 months ago asking this question, and I asked the question for the city attorney as to whether we have authority as a city to raise the minimum wage. And I'd like to get an answer at some point, and I don't know, we have maybe a couple more days before we get there, but if the city attorney could help us with that, or if Mr. Ginder can help us with that, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if there's any comment right now, but I'll just say again that the action in front of us is a contract to study the impacts of a minimum wage, as opposed to something else that might be down the line. Councilmember Cano.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Vice President. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Myers and his team for putting together such a strong proposal in response to the city's RFP on this issue. As we know, this is a national issue where families who struggle to make ends meet are really looking forward to ways that local governments and regional governments can really help them ensure that the wages that they're bringing home are keeping up with the expenses that it takes to provide for high quality childcare here in Minnesota, where families need to be able to provide children with warm coats and good boots. And I'm just really proud of our city council for being able to take this step in offering our open thinking in getting this information from this study. I think there's some good questions that I've heard from my colleagues around what it would mean to have a higher wage in Minneapolis, whether it's $12 or $15. And I'm really excited to be able to be a part of this work And I think it's really important for our city to be able to address this issue because it is connected to the racial inequities that we see in our city. It's directly impacting what kinds of educational opportunities the kids in our city get. It's impacting the types of jobs and opportunities that are given to certain people and not to others. So as the council member for the 9th Ward, where this issue has been extremely important, I just want to say that I'm really happy and proud of our council for being able to take this step forward in looking at this issue through this very robust study. And I'm very happy to see so many different groups coming together from Howard University, Rutgers, the U of M, and the Economic Policy Institute to tackle this issue and to help us look at it in a meaningful way. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Frye.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Constructing the parameters for a regional and municipal based minimum wage study, RFP, is very complex to say the least. So a huge thank you to staff for all their work. This was not an easy process, nor was it a quick one, but this process was most definitely spearheaded by our city employees and staff.
All right, thank you. And Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To go back to Councilmember Yang's inquiry, I do think it would be helpful before we get the results of the study back to have an opinion from our city attorney as to whether the city has the authority to do this. And of course, in conversation with people across the country, this is changing, what's the word I want to say, a legal landscape across the country. So as this movement moves through the country, we're going to have more legal information as to whether or not cities have the authority to do this. And of course, every state is different. So I will request a formal city attorney's opinion to inquire whether or not the city of Minneapolis does have the authority to impose a minimum wage. Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you for that. Our motion on the table is to approve the contract for a minimum wage increase. Okay. Well, we will consider that, I think, after we vote on this. All right. So our motion before us again is the contract for a minimum wage increase study. And I'm not seeing further discussion on that. All in approval, please say aye. 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 Opposed? No. And that item is approved. Next, we have consideration of the motion by Council President Johnson to ask for a city attorney opinion on the city's authority to raise the minimum wage, essentially. So that motion is before us. Is there any? Okay, the wording was impose a minimum wage. Any discussion on that motion? Council Member Frye.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. As I've stated before, the reality is the legality of a municipal minimum wage is presently gray, and I believe fully that you could argue both sides very well. The first question is whether there's express preemption by state law, and there is none. Since there is no express preemption, then you move on to the question of whether there's implied or field preemption, and that's an open-ended debate. So I don't want to put our city attorney in the position where they're just arguing in the gray.
Okay. And I guess I would add that with any opinion, I would expect that if the answer is not crystal clear, we're able to understand that from an opinion issued by the city attorney. And frankly, that's the case on many issues that come before us as a council, that there has not been an express ruling by the courts or a clear state law on the issue, and then it becomes a matter of interpretation and trying to understand what are those levels of gray. So I think that's, in my estimation, what we would probably see from a city attorney opinion. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with your comments wholeheartedly, and I don't want to be relying on my colleagues who are lawyers on the City Council to tell us what the law is. I want to be able to rely on our city attorney to tell us what the law is. And quite frankly, I can't believe we're at the point of having to formally ask for a city attorney's opinion. I've never seen a scenario where a council member who asked for a city attorney's opinion had to bring it through the council in order to get it. So it says, obviously, that those that don't want it are afraid of what it might say.
I'll just note that I might disagree slightly with that because of I think the most recent memory I have where there were questions for the city attorney probably was around the stadium and questions Councilmember Gordon asked. So I think it happens all the time, and the question is one council member, or should we take a vote on something as important as asking for a city attorney opinion in an area where the law perhaps is not crystal clear. All right, so that motion is before us. I'm not seeing further discussion. All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Gordon.
Sorry, I wasn't signed in to speaker management. I appreciate this discussion, and it is interesting. And I think that I've heard the theory before that sometimes you don't necessarily want a city attorney's opinion to be known publicly if you think you're going to have to defend one side or other of an issue later. And so I'd like to, if the opinion comes forward and we get it, reserve the to make the decision to get it in a closed session or to look at that. I mean, I don't know how to deal with that or whether it makes any sense. But essentially, if we come up with our legal team coming up with pages and pages saying, here's the best arguments for this side, and they lay out 10 great reasons why the city can't possibly do this for us, which would be a great service to us. And then they say, and here's the 10 reasons why the city could have the authority, and here's our best arguments for that. And they lay that out for us, which would also be a great service that we'd want to see. So I appreciate that. But then what they'd basically be doing is, if we ever got to the point where we started, based on that and other variables, decided to make a decision to move forward with one end, we wouldn't necessarily want the very 10 best reasons why we shouldn't be allowed to do that pushed out there by our own attorney. So it's just a point I want to raise, and I'm not really sure what the right way to go with this. I like transparency in open government, and I think that's great, and that everything's known. But I think that's a possibility that we could get into with something like this when we're debating the policy, and later we might want to come back and say we need to defend this policy now. And so let's think about what we're doing as we prepare to do that. That's just an idea.
Thank you. And I just want to note, again, this is something that frankly happens all the time, and Councilmember Gordon is exactly right. So kind of is a little bit dependent on what may be our course of action in the city. I'm going to, I know Councilmember Yang is in queue, but I'm going to ask Mr. Ginder if he has any preliminary thoughts on us on our ability to receive information from the city attorney in a closed session on this question.
Madam Chair, you probably would not be able to receive this information in a closed session because it's not one of the stated grounds for closing a meeting. However, you could receive it as an attorney-client privilege memorandum, and then the council as a whole could decide whether or not they wish to waive the attorney-client privilege and make that document public. But it could come to the council as attorney-client, and then obviously individual council members can't waive the privilege, but the council as a whole could waive the privilege.
All right, thank you. Then I would go ahead myself and make the kind of addition to that motion. We can vote on it separately of receiving this information as attorney-client privileged, and then we can make a decision as a council about that as directed by the city attorney. So on that motion, is there a comment, Councilmember Yang, on making it attorney-client privilege? Okay, Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I think that's a good approach to it. At the end of the day, I mean, really what we want is the best legal advice from our attorneys on this issue. And, that's all I'm asking.
I'm not seeing further comments. So on the motion to amend Council President Johnson's motion to add the direction to make any memorandum attorney-client privilege, any discussion? All in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And then on the I'm sorry. Okay. And then on the underlying motion, requesting a city attorney's opinion, any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. All right. With that, we have concluded with this item, and it took a little longer than I thought, and maybe it's just a lesson to me. So my apologies to all who are waiting here. So we are now starting to go through our public hearings and consideration of reappointment of 5 charter department heads. I'll note we have been joined by council members Palmisano and Goodman and Yang, I think, was not here and Councilmember Wright. And so we have all of those council members added, and then as well, Mayor Hodges has joined us today. So the first reappointment listed on our public hearing list is one of 3 continuations of public hearings, and it is for reappointment of the Chief of the Fire Department, John Friedel. I have said to each of the charter department heads that if they wish to say something to the council, they may, but they are not required to do so. We'll first do the public hearing, and we will take any further comment there, and then the council will consider the reappointment. And then for each department head, once we finish with your hearing, if you wish to stay, you're welcome to. If you wish to leave and continue with your work of the day, you're free to do that as well. So I have one person that has signed up to speak on the fire chief's reappointment, and so I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. And John Folta has signed up to speak. I'll ask if that person is here. Are you Mr. Folta? Okay, thank you. And if anyone else would like to speak, you can sign up with the clerk, or I'll also ask if anybody would like to raise their hands.
I'm John Folta. I live in Minneapolis, Ward 12, Precinct 4, Gulag number 3. I'm here to speak against the reappointment of Fire Chief John Friedel. My experience with him was a horrible experience. I suffer from severe heart disease, severe asthma, and severe emphysema. I asked him to enforce the laws regarding illegal campfires in the city of Minneapolis. He didn't even know any of the rules. He's drawing a salary of, $107,000 or so, 90 anyway, and he didn't even know the rules regarding campfires. This expedited the death of my 94-year-old mother, and it severely impacted my health to the tune of 13 asthma attacks in 2 months. I stand firm with Communities United Against Police Brutality and Black Lives Matter. However, I could not participate in the recent demonstrations at the 4th Precinct because the fire chief would not extinguish fires that were going on for a period of 3 weeks. To me, that's deadly. It affects my participation as a citizen to exercise my civil liberties. It affects my health. I believe that John Friedel, since we don't do public hangings anymore, should at least be terminated. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just note, this was my error in not saying before, is that we're asking you, if you would, to try to keep your comments to 2 minutes or less, and we have a timer just to help you with seeing that time and what does it look like. And thank you, Mr. Folta, because I forgot to mention that before he spoke. I do not have anyone else signed up to speak on the fire chief's reappointment. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Anyone else who would like to speak? Then I will go ahead and close the public hearing. Our action is to go ahead and proposed action is to approve the reappointment by the Executive Committee of John Friedel to the appointed position of Chief of the Fire Department for a 2-year term beginning January 4th, 2016. So I will go ahead and move that and ask if anyone, any discussion should be had. Okay. And I'll just note that there were comments by the mayor at the Public Safety committee and by others. So I'm not seeing any discussion. All in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And thank you, Mr. Chief Friedel, for your service, and you have been reappointed formally. And this will now move on to the City Council, which meets on Friday. So this is a committee action. All right, next we have the reappointment of the Director of Civil Rights. This is another continuation of a public hearing. I do have one person who has signed up to speak, and there may be others who wish to do so as well. So I will go ahead and reopen this public hearing and ask if Mr. Bicking, thank you, would go ahead and approach.
Yes, thank you. My name is Dave Bicking. I live in Minneapolis. I believe that Velma Corbel should not be reappointed as the Civil Rights Director. The biggest problem that I have with her is the killing of the CRA and the substitution of the OPCR, a system that was designed to fail. And it has failed spectacularly, particularly in the handling of civilian complaints of police misconduct. 2 years ago, at Corbel's last reappointment hearing, I was able to point to the headline in the Star Tribune, 437 complaints, no discipline. Now we are over 1,000 complaints, and still not one single officer has received discipline due to a civilian complaint. But you have heard this from me before, and apparently you don't care at this point. 2 years ago, Councilmember Gordon defended a vote to reappoint Corbel, saying that the council bears at least partial responsibility due to not setting clear expectations. That's a valid point. So he suggested, and you passed, some expectations to improve this toxic management style in the Civil Rights Department. One expectation was outside management consultation. Brunzell Consulting was hired to do a report and make recommendations. At last week's hearing, Gordon wondered whether the executive committee ever received that report. A day later, I did some research, and I found out for you that, no, there is no record that that report was ever received by the executive committee. So I sent you all a letter with some questions about that history. They were pretty easy questions about receiving the report, getting whether there's a continuing management consultation, the cost of the report. I have not yet received answers, and if I don't hear any answers today, I will file a data practice request right after this meeting. I shouldn't have to do that. Please show some consideration. You are the ones who should be most interested in those answers since you get a chance to vote. I no longer have hope or expectation that you will challenge any of the mayor's appointments. It's just a rubber stamp of the mayor's team. You could at least set some conditions or expectations during this process, and I hope that you will do so in all of these cases, but experience shows there will be no follow-up. She deserves to be fired for many reasons, but ultimately the failure is with this council, unless or until you take your responsibility seriously to serve the public instead of maintaining the current power structure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bicking. I don't have others signed up, but I want to ask if anybody else would like to speak as part of this public hearing. Would anyone else like to speak regarding the Civil Rights Director? I'm not seeing anyone, so I will go ahead and close the public hearing. And similarly, our action is to approving the reappointment by the Executive Committee of Velma Corbel to the appointed position of Director of Civil Rights for a 2-year term beginning January 4th, 2016. And I will move that and see if there is any discussion by my colleagues. There is someone? I'm sorry, Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. For this appointment, I will be voting no, and I'm going to reserve my comments for the council meeting on Friday in the interest of time. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any additional discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
One no. All right. And so that appointment is approved. Thank you very much for your service, Ms. Corbel. Next, we have our third and last continuation of a public hearing, and this is regarding the reappointment of the Chief of Police, Janae Harteau. And I do have I do have a number of people signed up. And so just as a note, we will be, again, using the timer. So just be aware to kind of guide yourself and trying to hold yourself to 2 minutes or less. And with that, I'll go ahead and open or reopen the public hearing. And I will go ahead and read off a few names so that you know you're coming up. But Mr. Folta is first, and he is here. John Folta is first. Next, Phil Murphy. Next, Renee Jensen. If you would like to kind of go ahead and stand behind the speaker so you're ready when your turn comes, that would be appreciated. Mr. Folta.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me go first. It was an ADA request because I'm going to run out of oxygen in half an hour. As much as I like the diversity that Janae Harto represents, I think she needs to be fired immediately. She's the head of the Minneapolis Police Department, but she's not a leader. By this time, she should have put forth different types of legislation, requesting them at the state legislature to disarm the police force. Let's make it like it is in London, where police don't have guns. They can't kill people. Only the big guns come in when something is really important. Let's use the policeman's pension to pay the fines when they violate someone's civil liberties or when they kill somebody. Once they've depleted their pension fund, they might start to listen. My mother, 94 years old, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, a fine lady that voted in every election, died calling every policeman pigs and refusing to vote because she could not do jury duty and believe the testimony of any police officer, because she, as a 94-year-old person, was brutalized by the police, as was I. There was no reason for it to happen. Our home was entered without a warrant. We were made fun of. One of the policemen, who apparently happened to be a doctor, told me that I wasn't even disabled. I told him, well, not only are you a lousy cop, but you're a lousy doctor too. The police in the city are out of control, and no one's taking the leadership. You have to change the way policing is done in this town. I was a policeman, and nothing in my training allowed me to summarily kill young black men. And a half of my family is black, and I want my 1-year-old and my 4-year-old nephews not to get gunned down in the street. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Folta. Phil Murphy. And then next we have Renee Jensen. And thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I'm Philip Murphy. I own a flower shop in North Minneapolis. It's the oldest flower shop in Minnesota, started in 1896. And we've had some real challenges the last 3 years. North Minneapolis has literally been laid to waste by crime, especially in the last 3 years. The sound of gunfire is what we're used to. Incoming bullets, rounds. I have 4 bullet holes in my building. 3 people have been shot on my corner this summer since the 4th of July. And my employees, my skilled floral designers, will not come to North Minneapolis anymore because of the crime. So the council, the media, people talk about wanting jobs, wanting opportunities in North Minneapolis, in the city. Well, let me tell you, there aren't any because of the crime. The guns, the gangs. There's nothing here. Chicago's Fish and Chicken was robbed by 4 armed gunmen Sunday. They went and shot the place up, robbed them. Employees took cover on the church, on the roof, on the building. That was just Sunday. The atrocities that go on in North Minneapolis just defy logic. And I printed here, and I submitted for the city clerk record, 3 years of the first Sunday of the year in history. Every year, successively, there's more violence and gun crimes, 3 years in a row. The first Sunday this year, 6 people were shot in North Minneapolis in one day. How do we stop it? Well, I don't know. But I'll share that my opinion is this current administration is failing. So something has to give. And for me, it starts at the top. So I don't know if you all can see this, but this is an overlay of gunshots and sounds of gunfire for the whole year. North Minneapolis it's not here. It's blotted out. I've submitted this as part of the record, and I've given this to the media. I used to wake up in the morning with a lot of ambition, thinking that we had a future in North Minneapolis. Now my fear is that North Minneapolis is the future for the whole city, because our violence is spreading. Restaurant Row was shot up not too long ago, 3rd Street, from 2nd Avenue to 1st Avenue. 16 blowholes. A lot of windows shot out. You know, how do you quantify that? How do you deal with that? Something has to give, and it's a societal problem, okay? And it's not something, obviously, the police chief can fix. So this is a big issue. But this current policy, the holistic community policing policy, well, it's not working. And I can tell you that as a witness, because I have 4 blowholes in my building, front side, 1 in the back, all from recent months. So
Thank you, sir.
I'm no, don't appoint this police chief for a 2nd term. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have Renee Jensen, and then Pastor Graham, and then Chuck Turchek.
My name is Renee Jensen. I'm the Development Director for the Barbara Schneider Foundation on 2419 Nicollet Avenue South. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in the year 2000. I was very affected by Barbara Schneider's death in a confrontation with police in June of that year. I was the same age as Barbara and lived by myself. Her death made me very concerned about my safety, the responder safety, and the community member safety if I had a mental health crisis.